Greetings adventurers, my name is Kramer and today I'm going to show you how I turned this into this. It's a very simple modification, but I think it looks a lot better and it also feels a lot better. It feels a lot more secure. Now the armor that I'm wearing right now unmodified is the Ready for Battle fighter armor from, I believe the manufacturer is House of Warfare, and you can find it on Medieval Collectibles. It's very, very cheap. I think it's the cheapest leather armor option for adults, so I got it many years ago when I was first starting, and I don't wear it as often now because of the issue that I have with it, which is because of the construction, it is just a series of very thin suede rectangles that have been riveted together with very thin suede squares. It creates these very obvious gaps here on the actual armor itself, and you can see straight into my clothing. Obviously, it's not good for protection. Suede obviously isn't good for protection either. It's mostly for the looks, but what I'd like to do today is reinforce it to the best of my ability with some leather straps in the hopes that it will help close those gaps up and also give it a little bit more rigidity, so it feels a bit more like armor, even though there's not historical backing to this at all. So we're gonna go ahead and step over to my work table because this should be a pretty simple project. I always say that. Sometimes they end up being very complicated, but I actually think this is gonna be pretty easy. So the first thing we need to look at is the back of the cuirass so that we can take a look at these small leather squares because we are going to be fitting in these straps in between those. So the first measurement that we're going to need to take, which may be different for you depending on the size of armor that maybe you have, is the distance between those two squares on the given layer. So we're gonna go ahead and note that down. In my case, it was about 2 inches and like 1/8 or so. The next thing we need to consider is that in order to lace these straps in between, we have to account for the straps that already exist. It's one of the reasons why I'm not doing one up here and I won't be doing the back, because there are just so many straps and so many buckles that it becomes difficult to weave anything in between. In this case, the straps that are interlacing have to go underneath the panel that have the straps already, otherwise they're going to get bound up and it's not going to function right. That means that because there are an even number of rectangles per level, as it were, we're going to need to double them up here in the center. So you'll notice here on the actual breastplate, the straps in the front actually cross over 2 rectangles, and that is so that everything lines up properly. Both straps on either side go underneath the actual attachment straps and then end on the inside of the breastplate rather than on the outside. And the way that I've designed it here actually gives us this sort of line, this sort of, it almost looks like abs a little bit on the front of the breastplate there, which I think worked out very, very well. So the next measurement, after we have measured the distance between those squares, that is the width of each of your straps, we're going to have to measure the length. And knowing that we have to overlap here in the center, it means that we're actually going to be going from the right square, from the center of the right square to the left side of the breastplate, and from the left center square to the right side of the breastplate, and they're going to interlock here in the center. So what we need to do is we need to take that measurement. We need to go to the right side of center and then measure all the way to the end. When we are measuring from the middle of the tile, we want to leave a little bit of room so that we have space to punch holes for the rivet, because the rivet is going to have to go all the way through these layers. In my case, that was about 9 inches and 1/8. Once we have those rectangles, all we need to do is cut those out. I made these 2 templates just to make sure that this was actually going to work the way I was picturing it. I used 3-ounce leather for the dummy test, and that worked fine. Now that we have checked to make sure that that works, we can proceed. I'm going to go with the heavier weight leather, 7 to 8-ounce leather, because I think it's going to feel a little bit more robust. And because I already had the ones in the 3-ounce leather pre-cut to test, I can just use those ones as my template without having to worry about measuring each and every time. So I just need to cut duplicate rectangles that are 2 1/8 inches wide by 9 1/8 inches long. Now that we have the actual straps cut, we need to cut out the male and female ends so that they can actually interlace here together in the center. That's how we are getting that still interwoven look. If we didn't do that and we just had one long strip, it would look like there was just a band. It would almost look like it was a mistake here in the center. So I'm going the extra mile just to try to make it look a little bit better. So the way that I did this, and you might come up with a different way, is that I actually just took that rectangle and I laced it in the way it was going to fit. And then in the center where they have to overlap, I marked that out. After I marked that out, I cut a small slit that was 1 inch and 1/8 wide, big enough to insert the other end into. Now, if you had an oblong punch, it would be a lot easier to do this. I did the roundabout way because I don't have an oblong punch. So I took that measurement, 1 1/8 of an inch wide, and then I punched a hole on each final end of that, and then I just cut out the middle section in order to end up with a long, slightly wide slit that I would then be able to insert the other end into. All we have to do there is we have to cut the other strip, the matching partner strip, so that it has a 1 1/8 inch wide block at the end, so that it can fit into the other piece. And then when we stick them together, those two tabs that form when the two leather pieces interlock go on the inside of the breastplate as shown here. We just need to repeat that for the other sets. We're going to end up with 6 total individual strips. That makes 3 pairs. After we have all of that done, took me about 30 minutes to cut everything out total. It was very, very quick. I am now going to dye them a nice golden brown. I am using Fibing's Pro leather dye. It's an alcohol-based leather dye, so it dries really quickly, and we're not in danger of staining something's too dark in comparison. We don't have to do multiple coats. Very, very simple. After we let that dry, I'm going to give it a wax coating and then buff that out so it's nice and shiny. It is at this point that I decided that I am in fact going to use the smooth side of the leather out rather than the suede side. If I'd used the suede side, it might have blended a little bit better with the actual breastplate itself because it's already made out of suede, but the dye didn't take quite as well to the suede side of the veg tan that I'm using, so I think it would have looked a little strange, and now we have a little bit of a material contrast. Once those pieces are prepped, it is time to punch the holes. Originally, I was going to try to punch all of the individual straps, but I decided it was easier to just lace everything in the way it's going to fit, take my punch, and then punch the holes right then and there. Inserting 4 7/16 of an inch rivets here in the center on each strap, anchoring it to the actual breastplate itself. So there are a total of 12 of them, and then 12 on the outsides in order to anchor the long ends of the straps to the outside of the breastplate. For this build, we are using 2 sizes of rivets, 7/16 inch rivets, as well as 4/16 inch rivets. The reason I'm using 2 rather than 1 is to keep the straps from pivoting or rotating while I'm wearing it. I really wanted to give this as much rigidity as possible. And from there, the only step that I might do after this is to just gently wet this leather again, and then wet form the edges so that they curve in rather than butting out a little bit. But now it is done. It's still definitely not real armor. But for my purposes, it is going to function just fine, and it hides that terrible, ugly gap that forms because of how thin the suede is here. The suede still pulls apart, but you can't see underneath, and it looks a little bit more believable, and it just feels so much sturdier. Compared to the back, it's essentially just like wearing a suede jacket or something because it depresses so easily. Here in the front, I really am getting the resistance that I'm looking for. And for those of you that have eagle eyes, you will notice that this breastplate actually is going a little bit lower than I recommend. In this video here, my belly button is here, and it does go a little bit lower than that. There are ways to break that rule because clearly I am still able to lift my legs. I can bend over and touch my toes, and the breastplate doesn't really get in the way. So I now have a breastplate that has a very different look, has a very different function than my Witcher breastplate. I made made that one essentially to replace this suede breastplate because that one was gonna feel more like real armor. I wanted something that was gonna feel like real armor, whereas this one didn't, but I have now finally modified it so it has a little bit more structure to it. It feels a little bit more robust, and now I actually want to wear it, and I will, because it fits this costume that I'm working on a little bit better than the Witcher one actually does. So I will see you next week, and I will stop with the teasing eventually. You will see what it is that I'm working on once I have all of the elements together. But in the meantime, I'd like to wish you good luck on your adventures. Okay. I know I can't leave you on a cliffhanger like that. Last video I said I'm working on a new costume. Today I'm saying I'm working on a new costume. What's going on? Okay, I'll give you a little sneak peek, a little hint.